Good afternoon, everyone. It's 5 o'clock on the East Coast. That can only mean, well, it can mean a lot of things, but for us, it's Word Live Wednesdays. We've coined the phrase. My name is Vinny Onorati. I'm the co-owner of Word Bookstore in Brooklyn and Jersey City, New Jersey. The two gentlemen on your screen are joining me today as my guests. The man in the middle is Danny Kane. He is the owner of Raven Bookstore in Kansas. He's also an author, specifically of the book How to Resist Amazon and Why, as well as many different collections of poetry. And the gentleman next to him is Mason Engel, who is also an author and filmmaker, documentarian who's made a film called Books Tour, in which he visits 28 bookstores in 17 days, I believe. Mm-hmm. And we'll hear all about why he did that and what all of this has to do with Amazon, because we are, of course, the day after Prime. I guess it's over, I hope. Is it over? This has become now, it's become a burden on us and a sort of a national holiday.
It's never over, Vinny.
Whether we like it or not, yeah. You know, instead of the fictional war on Christmas, we should have, well, we are having a war on Prime Day. So I have a lot of questions, but first I want you both to tell me a little bit about each of yourselves and each of your projects and how they relate to the topic of the A word.
Danny, do you want to lead off?
Yeah. Okay, I'll go first. Yeah, my name's Danny. I live in Lawrence, Kansas, where I own the Raven Bookstore. I have owned it as of August 1st, I will be the owner for 4 years. And the Raven has long before, it's been there since 1987, and long before I got there, it kind of committed itself to a pro small business, anti big corporate interest stance that came in large part from operating across From a Borders Books and Music from 1997 to 2011, like directly across the street from us. And so the original owners, who are good friends of mine and regulars of the store to this day, took to kind of a kind of, I would call it ethical storytelling to make their case to the community, and in deciding how to deal with this superstore across the street, just decided to address it head on and make it part of what they did. And that, of course, happened through newspaper op-eds, in-store conversations, letters to the editor, talking to newspaper reporters at any chance they got. And I've just continued that mission. Of course, that Borders closed with the rest of the chain in 2011. But now Amazon is a much bigger threat and a bigger worry for all of us. And so I'm using the tools available to me, like social media, to continue telling that story and trying to convince people of the importance of small businesses and the dangers of letting Amazon grow unchecked. Some of that social media work caught some attention. It turned into a zine called How to Resist Amazon and Why. This is the original black and white 16-pager. I self-published this. I spent a couple weeks of my life every night making more zines because it sold a lot in our store. And then other bookstores got really interested in carrying it. And I tried to be my own zine distributor, and that got unsustainable. So the fine folks at Microcosm Publishing agreed to put out their own version of the zine, give me my evenings back. And that people were interested enough in this that the zine sold super well, and Microcosm approached me about writing a book and turning it into a book. And I had learned a lot in between writing the zine and when they talked to me about doing the book. And so I was able to kind of hone and expand my argument and bring in a lot of other sources. And the book came out in March of 2021, just a couple months ago. Yeah, I'm here to talk about it. I love to celebrate the importance of small businesses and kind of talk about how we can evade, beat, and deal with the threat that is Amazon.
Thank you. By the way, did you have issues with the logo on the cover?
No.
Interesting.
Not that I know of so far. I think that I get a little worried, and my parents are really worried about this too. It's like, what if they sue you? But the thought that lets me sleep at night, and I don't know how much grounded in reality this is or not, is that Amazon is very sensitive to PR. Right. And they are hyper conscious of their own image, and they're very protective of it. And just Amazon suing a single small bookstore owner is such bad PR and would be such a bad look for them. Like, I would win the court of public opinion, regardless of what happened in the actual courts. and they are aware of that. So I don't think they have any interest, even if they're even aware of the book.
Right.
I don't think they have any interest in stopping it because it would make them look pretty bad.
Got it. Mason, are those books on your shirt? I just noticed that.
They are, yes.
Excellent.
If you've seen the trailer for the documentary, this is one of my 3 main book shirts that I rotated through over the course of 17 days. And that's not quite as gross as it sounds, but it definitely wasn't ideal either. We were just trying to stay on brand.
I'm going to drop a link to your film in the chat here. So tell us about it.
Yeah, well, my name is Mason. I am from Columbus, Indiana, which is just, I don't know, a couple hundred miles east of Lawrence, Danny.
Yeah.
And so my story, actually, you're at the inflection point of it, Danny. In 2017, I self-published a novel on Amazon through Amazon using KDP, and the book did decently well online. Come 2019, though, I was looking for additional channels to promote the book. So naturally, I turned to brick and mortar. As an indie author, until you get pretty big, usually you don't start considering that sort of distribution. So in 2019, I decided to take a road trip from Indiana to California and back and visit 50 independent bookstores in 50 days. And my goal was at each place that I visited to give away a copy of my book and ask the bookseller for feedback and maybe try and form a relationship and ask them to sell the book. So I set out from Columbus, visited store 1, 2, 3, 4, got to around store 8 or 10 when I got to Lawrence. And I had my book in my hand. I was walking up to the store, to the Raven, and I saw this black and white pamphlet looking thing in the window. And it said, "How to Resist Amazon and Why." And I remember stopping on the sidewalk and looking down on my book and just saying to myself, like, oh my God, what am I? Yeah, it hadn't clicked in my head. I hadn't processed what I was doing because I was so preoccupied with my own agenda, my own career, that I didn't realize that I was walking into these bookstores and asking booksellers to promote a product that was available exclusively through their direct competitor. It sounds so obvious, so obviously insensitive now, but it took your zine, Danny, to make me realize what I was doing. So the thing that really catalyzed the rest of my story was thinking back to the booksellers I had talked to thus far on the trip, the 8 or 10 folks, and everyone had received me with such enthusiasm and excitement and joy and warmth because it was a quirky story. Maybe I didn't really know what I was doing or I didn't understand how insensitive it was, but everyone was so kind. And that just spoke to me. And it made me want to learn more about the industry. So I finished the rest of that trip with a slightly different approach, mainly just asking folks for feedback. And then resolved to take a second trip, this time around the East Coast, stopping through Word in Jersey City to shoot interviews with booksellers. And this trip wouldn't be for self-promotion. It was for the bookstores. And I was trying to get to the bottom of a pretty simple question, which was, why should people care? Why should people shop at an indie bookstore? And we got some great answers on the trip from dozens of booksellers, and we're excited to share them in the Books Tour documentary.
And tell us a little bit about the Bink relationship.
Yeah, so that was also born out of the misplaced intentions of my first road trip, because we knew that if I just made a documentary with this second trip and tried to sell it and make money myself, that's just repeating the same old mistakes. So we wanted to make an impact. And the best way to do that, we thought, was to partner with Bink, the Book Industry Charitable Foundation, who over the years has served essentially as the book industry's safety net. And of course, you two can speak more to this than I can. But our goal from the beginning of the film was to raise money for Bink. Whatever ticket sales we're able to make, 100% of that money goes straight to the foundation. Yeah,
they were super helpful, of course, during the pandemic when a lot of booksellers, were furloughed or couldn't work. They provided that safety net, as you say. it's funny that we still get emails from plenty of self-published authors with Amazon links, and that's just a deal breaker. I'm surprised
Yeah.
you got up to Danny. You actually got through the front door.
Yeah.
That's pretty
No,
amazing.
it's there doesn't seem to be as much information as I would like there to be for indie authors on how to be considerate of their independent store. You go online and you Google how to self-publish a book. The first thing that comes up is KDP Select or whatever the program is nowadays. But people don't realize that there are other ways to self-publish a book and to be considerate and cooperative with your local bookshop.
Danny, let's take a step back. So your title, of course, is attention grabbing. Short of reading us the entire book, give us sort of the elevator pitch, because I was sort of thinking about the notion of Thanksgiving dinner and trying to talk politics with your parents. I find like I'm in this position all the time, having to explain to people why Amazon is bad and why they shouldn't buy from there, and still surprised to this day that even some people I know and love still don't quite get it. They assume that just because they're not buying books from there, well, then they can sort of wash their hands of it. So if you can sort of just give us the 50,000-foot view of why.
Well, I mean, Amazon is doing more to set back small businesses, worker rights, data privacy than any other company ever in the history of existence. They're humongous, they're powerful, they're still growing, and it's a lot more than just retail. I mean, I think the big grudge that booksellers have is that Amazon sells books as a loss leader, often below the cost that it would take us, like my cost. If I'm paying a publisher 54% of a book's cover price and Amazon's selling it for 50% off, like they're losing money, or they're getting a better discount than us. Either one is bad news for the health of independent bookstores. So that's one thing, and that's how they disrupt retail. But they have a similar effect in every industry they touch. They own Ring Doorbell, which has turned into the largest private surveillance network the world has ever known. And they have a lot of sketchy connections to law enforcement and police departments. In some ways, they've turned police into sales forces. They're sending cops out into their communities to try to sell more Ring doorbells so the cops can gather more data from those videos. That's just one example. And there are 1,000 examples like this. And there's on the other hand, and I always try to frame this argument positively, because I don't think you're going to badger or berate or scare someone out of using Amazon, in part because it's wildly convenient and the prices are super low. And some people, money is a concern. Some people don't live in places that have a lot of small businesses, although many small businesses are operating online now too, thanks to the pandemic. But on the other side, you've got small businesses who are doing a lot of important work to enrich and build community, to push the community's culture and diversity forward. And those places really need support. And they can do with your support much better than the world's richest man who's trying to buy his way into space. Like, we're trying to buy our way into a better community here in Lawrence, Kansas. And to me, that's a more noble goal.
Yeah. So now that you've mentioned him, there seems to be, he's in the news daily. If he's not shooting himself into space, he's buying my beloved James Bond franchise. I've given up just about anything Amazon's touched, but I don't know if I can do that. We got rid of the Ring doorbell, but let me play the drunk uncle here. So I replaced my Ring doorbell with a Google doorbell. Now, why? And we're using Apple products as we speak. Why is it okay to use products and support these companies and not Amazon? Now, I have my own answer, but I'd like to hear from you guys how you make that, what your rebuttal to something like that is when people ask.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll say two things. I have concerns about all of big tech. Yeah. I think they all have. There's the concern about data privacy and control over our life, and corporate consolidation is across the board. Amazon, it happens to be a pretty good place to start this argument because it's books. Like, this started with books, and that's like I bleed books. Like, that's just my life. But I think all of the solutions I suggest work for all of these companies. The second thing I will say is I think really like being hyper detailed and policing people's individual consumer choices is not the right way to approach this discussion, because that's just it's turning into tattletaling, and it's trying to get into people's business, and that's not what I'm doing. I want to uplift small businesses, and I want the government to step in and curb the power of big tech. None of that has anything to do with someone not buying an iPhone. That's none of my business. People's personal choices are up to them. And I think if I'm out here criticizing Amazon by criticizing individual consumer choices, it's a really bad look, because it's just holier than thou. It's like, I have this figured out and you don't. No one's going to listen to me. And that's not a great way to argue. And I don't want to argue that way. This is a government problem with a government solution. And that's the difference between the zine and the book, is I get much more into the questions of antitrust policy and government suggestions. I think if an individual consumer decides after learning about Amazon and their abuses that they want to pull away and deal with the company less, that's great. And that may very well end up in them supporting the small businesses in their community more, which is a great thing. But like policing individual consumer choices is not the solution to the Amazon problem.
Yeah. For me, I had this conversation with someone recently, and I went back to Bezos, because it's funny. In a previous life, I was with an apparel company, and we took a trip to Seattle to meet with Amazon. And this is before we had been selling online, and everyone was afraid to sell online because the department stores would blacklist you, and you wouldn't be able to sell in Macy's if you were going to sell on Amazon. That was the concern back then, which is no longer a concern, obviously. But I remember sitting in the lobby, and there was a glass case, and it had the first book they ever sold on display. And we've read this, we know this. Bezos didn't set out to build this store because he loved books and wanted to share books with the world, right? He went out to find, which product can I sell online? He looked at CDs, he looked at DVDs, and he decided books made sense, right? So I don't think he was coming from a place of passion the way we are. Steve Jobs, maybe, but he was into computers, he built them, so I'll give him a pass on that, right? So that for me is one of the big differences. And then I'm sure you mentioned antitrust and stuff, and the minimum advertised price. I wanted to touch on that just for a second, because that's something that I also bring up to people. And when you mentioned it to them, they're sort of surprised. They're taken aback when you say, well, books are one of the only products that have the price printed on them. Mm-hmm. Magazines as well. But they can't think of many others. So we're sort of handcuffed. And one thing I noticed during the pandemic is everyone sort of fell in love again with their local businesses, especially restaurants. And then when restaurants or barbers had to raise their prices, no one blinked. They were happy to pay more for that bottle of wine. Or the markups on wine are notorious. But if your local restaurant needed to raise their burger price by $1 because of the pandemic, you'd gladly pay it. If we added a nickel to the book on the shelf, they'd run us out of town. It would make no sense to them, because Amazon has trained us by that red line through the price to pay less. Old Navy has trained us. H&M has trained us. Napster told us that music is essentially worthless, and that's sort of what it's become, right? And Netflix is doing the same for TV. You really shouldn't pay a premium for anything. It's just all free, even though it's not really. We're paying with other things, but it's always surprised me that, because like you said, it started with books, but it permeates everything. But yet none of that ever comes up in the conversation. It's always sort of sour grapes from the book industry, but the hardware store has the same issues.
Yeah.
Every industry has the same issues. So why, at this point, there are younger generations who have grown up within the age of Amazon who probably don't know what they started with, or that they even sell books. I looked at their homepage on Prime Day. There wasn't a book sale advertised. It was everything else. So it's good in a way that books have stuck, but why do you think people haven't moved on from the book argument and seen through what they're doing to the rest of the economy and the rest of Main Street, so to speak? Either of you can answer that.
Well, Danny, you're the expert here.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mason, and then I'll follow up.
Well, yeah, I think at the basis of why people don't know or choose not to know the effects that Amazon has is just convenience. It's a very inconvenient truth to have to acknowledge because I mean no one can deny the prices and the cheapness of Amazon. I think though what the pandemic has done for many people is that it's placed the value of those things in the proper perspective because after the first wave of logistical nightmarish chaos in the first couple months of the pandemic, we've all been able to get things relatively fast and relatively cheap. And yet there's been a spike in anxiety across the country, in depression, various mental emotional issues. And it just points to the fact that, okay, we can get these things cheaply, but we need more than that as people. And the thing that we need more of is something that Amazon can't sell. So I think people are starting to prioritize that missing something a little bit more.
Yeah, and that I'm sure is something you discovered right on your trips. You know, that human element, and people talk about it a lot. Recommendation engines, as great as they can be, can't really replace that. How did that help inform your pivot? As I assume, and the film's not finished yet. I assume you thought one way going in, and then the people you spoke to essentially changed your mind.
Yeah, well, I'll go back to a quote, and I might butcher his last name, but it's Ocean Vuong.
Yep.
The poet. He talks about how Amazon, with their algorithms, can show you where you've been and can recommend future purchases based on that. But that's a very linear approach to forming your own future character and your own life. But a bookseller can have a conversation with you and recommend something that may seem out of left field that will be just the book for you. It will be the book that changes or inspires you. And I want to put this question to the both of you, but it seems like every bookseller that I talk to sells books because at some point in their past there was a book that changed them or that had that powerful impact on them, and they're motivated to give that to someone else. And there's something in that interaction when you talk to someone who genuinely cares about passing this thing along that you just can't get from ones and zeros spitting out a book based on your next read list. It's just different for me, and that's really what was at the heart of my transformation, is realizing that and valuing that more.
Oh yeah, I think we all believe in the power of books, and we do this out of the love of books. In many ways, it's an extraordinarily difficult job that's not particularly financially rewarding, and it requires a tremendous amount of labor and emotional investment. But one of the things that keeps us going is just the love of dealing with books, and I think that shows. I know it shows at the Raven with our wonderful team and how much care they take in doing their job. And it's really is a marked contrast from how Jeff Bezos arrived at books. He was like, okay, these are cataloged. They all have a standardized numbering system, so it's easy to warehouse millions of them. They're flat. They're cheap to ship. Let's sell books online. And it's like, if Barnes & Noble has 100,000 books, I can have 1 million books in the warehouse and I can easily destroy them. That was his line of thinking at arriving at books. And they might be out there. I don't know. I've never met anyone in the independent bookstore industry that thinks like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And no one has opened a bookstore because for those reasons, right? And certainly not why we stay in there. We're not obviously getting rich off of them. Was there anything else, Mason, that surprised you outside of just thinking outside of books? I'm sure some of these stores had cafes. I'm sure some of them, we all sell other things, what we call sidelines, because frankly, the margins are better on candles. I remember my wife telling me years ago, someone was trying to get her to sell socks, and she said, well, why would I sell socks? We're a bookstore. Cut to our wonderful sock selection today.
Right.
So now it makes perfect sense to have all those other things. So that all speaks to community, and I'm sure you noticed that as well on your journey.
Well, yeah, the evolution of bookstores in the past 10, 20 years, probably just 10 years, it seems like artistic communities are starting to consolidate a little more because they're being pressed then upon, especially in the form of real estate from all sides. So the more artistic elements we can include in a single place, or the more creatively minded, or it doesn't even have to be creative people, right? It can be people who value books and stories and literature. The more excuses we can give those folks to come to a place, the better that business is going to do. So we encountered many stores on the road that were bookstores and cafes, or bookstores and bars, or all three. Those were some of my favorites. But yeah, the sidelines were always important, and not just the sidelines of products, but the sidelines of other things that are bringing people through the doors and ultimately driving some more sales with books.
Do you think, and Danny, maybe you can answer this, do you think, I feel like we've gotten some momentum, oddly, because of the pandemic. As I mentioned earlier, people now really understand the value of their main street when it came time to when you can only walk a few blocks to get something. So suddenly all these shops and stores that you only passed on the way to your job are suddenly become the heart and soul of your community. How do we keep that momentum and stop people from swinging right back into old habits?
Well, I think there's a lot to say for just simply doing the best, for being really good at being a bookstore. I think there's a lot of value in assembling a dedicated team of good booksellers, and having a thoughtful curation, a strong point of view, and a really tight ties to your community. And I think, pandemic or not pandemic, that's just smart business, and that will you and your community will be in a kind of supportive exchange, where you support them and they support you. And I'm not sure the formula of that has changed all that much,
Right.
and how we think about it. That said, I think there are tools. There are new tools that the bookstores can adopt. I think, even before the pandemic, social media has become a huge part of what the Raven does. Bringing the experience of the Raven beyond our walls to people across the country and around the world. And how do you translate your store's in-store voice into a voice that works online? And I think that's a great way to reach new people. And we were one of the longest closed bookstores in the country. I think we just reopened 2.5 weeks ago to browsing. We were doing online only until June 5th. And our web sales haven't really dropped. We've just simply added the in-store browsing on top of it, and we still have a pretty dedicated group of people that are supporting us online. And so it's like, how can you? We're never going to do Amazon numbers online, but it certainly does provide a nice feeling of security. And then, just in terms of, I think in the pandemic, we thought a lot about accessibility and expanding beyond the four walls and bringing the Raven to people where they were, because people couldn't come into the Raven. And so we did that with free local delivery, which we're still doing and probably will still do. We expanded and streamlined our curbside pickup operation. Like before the pandemic, curbside pickup was just a funny little thing that a couple older customers did, is they would park out front and call and say, "Bring me my book." But now we have an official procedure for that, and people use it all the time, even today, even still. So I think these questions of access and how to expand your bookstore experience beyond the four walls are important and interesting, to the extent that they just help you do that original kind of nugget of community bookselling, which hasn't changed.
Right. It's frankly why we're here. I explained to you guys earlier why we started this series, because really, for a while, our booksellers were sort of stuck behind closed doors processing orders, and so they didn't really have that interaction with customers. So, through technology and embracing it, we have been able to reach more people than we normally would. I think similar to your situation, our online orders have spiked tremendously. Those are almost mostly new customers. Hopefully they will remain and not fall back to the old Amazon habits. I think there are also alternatives that people just never thought of. I mean, I'd rather someone go to Target to buy something online than Amazon. At least it's not them. They're in the community. They pay taxes, I think. So, and they hire locally. So that'll be helpful. And then we'll see if we can turn that tide. Mason, what's your ultimate goal in making the film, and when it's done? Tell us a little bit about where you are production wise, and how you're telling that story, and then when it's done, how you plan to get it seen.
Yeah, so just first the status update on what's going on right now. We to kind of fit between the ABA's schedule, the American Booksellers Association schedule, and BINC's schedule, the Book Industry Charitable Foundation, just to articulate some of the acronyms here. We're releasing the film a little bit before we're done. So right now we have a rough cut, and we will be finishing that in the next couple weeks. But between now and July 7th, we're selling digital rentals, pre-selling digital rentals, and tickets to the virtual premiere, both of which will be redeemable in mid-July. So the film is very, very close. We have the bones there, and now we're just fleshing it out. The goal with the film is similar to what you were talking about, Danny, in reminding people that it is an exchange. There were, I think, some bookstores who have failed, and this is hard to talk about, I think, but I think some booksellers at some point got the notion that it was the community's job to support them, and that can be a tricky line, because it is a good thing. A bookstore is an objectively valuable place to have in a community, but it also needs to serve a clear function. And I think the best bookstores over the years have realized that and have leaned into creating community and staying connected and having a great staff of booksellers giving great recommendations. So that's one of the things that I try to emphasize in the film, is that this isn't charity by shopping at a bookstore. When you go to an indie bookshop, you're getting a quality experience and a quality product. And just we're trying to remind people of that. And secondly, the goal is not to compel people to shop indie, because we have so many shoulds these days, especially with the quarantine procedures, isolation, all these things. There's so many things that we have to do that we should do. And I think people are exhausted by that. Especially in America, we value our freedom and our individual liberties so highly. So the goal with the film is to move people to shop local. This is something that I think people should want to do. And the film is kind of an ode to the indies, a love story for the indies. And all the booksellers we talked about, even though we were talking in the context of the pandemic when we were filming the interviews, we focused on the booksellers like making a pitch for their stores. Why should people want to come here? And they did a great job, and that's the message we're trying to spread.
That's great. Yeah, it's funny. I don't think, not to put down other retail sectors, but I can't think of another one where it's vital that the employees are overqualified in a way, right? You can fake it at the hardware store to a point, or the clothing store. Right. Maybe if you're a waiter, plenty of waiters who've never tasted the food. So it's interesting that we have to really hire these amazing people to be the face of our stores if we can't be there ourselves. So hopefully when jobs start to return, we always in the industry sort of have the struggle of how do we make this a career? When I was younger and worked at Macy's, there were guys and girls who worked there their whole lives. It was like they put kids through college working like the suit department at Macy's. And now, that sounds like you might as well be working at McDonald's. All retail jobs have they have the stigma, and they've been sort of devalued. So, I think we've resisted that in a sense, because our people, first and foremost, are readers, and they love books, and they want to talk about books. So my main concern is keeping the pipeline of these people there, and creating future bookstore owners, frankly, because at some point people love movies, but none of them they didn't save the video store, right? So hopefully, that's something I'd love to see sort of come out of the rubble of this. Are you seeing, Danny, sort of what's that been like for you as far as staffing and especially during this pandemic? Were you able to sort of manage that?
Well, this whole issue is so crucial, and the question of future generations of booksellers is the main thing that motivated me to run and eventually be elected to the American Booksellers Association board, because it's just whatever momentum we have is gone if we can't cultivate a next generation of booksellers. And it's the millennials and Gen Z have significantly less wealth than previous generations. And so you can't count on people to have large sums of money to put a down payment on a business. And that's a crucial issue. And we need to talk as an entire industry about how to make this a sustainable career and how to make sure, like, the love of books is a great thing. And being surrounded by books and getting advanced copies and meeting authors is all wonderful, but none of that is going to pay medical bills. And so, like, we need to be able that we need to make sure booksellers can make a viable living as booksellers. So at the Raven, I made a promise to myself to never pay below living wage for Lawrence, Kansas. And we've been able to keep that, and almost all the people, well, I think everybody now is above living wage. We were lucky enough to have tremendous online support throughout the pandemic that we kept our team intact. We actually added one more bookseller during the pandemic, which, like, I'm proud of that to the extent that I had control over it, but I think a lot of it was just luck and tremendous community support. And then it's like we have a ton of resumes coming in. People really want to work at the Raven, but like at my team, I've had 0% turnover for the last year. So like I don't have any spots. Yeah. Like I appreciate it, but there's no openings. So we're in a good place, and the team being together for a whole year without any changes is people are really good at what they do, and the team is close, and they're doing really amazing work. I know that's not the case for other places, and I know a lot of people had to make really hard decisions, and I feel a lot of empathy and solidarity for the folks who had to make those tougher choices. But the question of how much people make bookselling and whether or not people view bookselling as a career is crucial over the next couple of years of the book industry. Because we absolutely need a next generation of booksellers. And we don't want these talented readers and booksellers to feel like they have to go somewhere else. This is what I'm going to say. Amazon, there's been some great work. Bringing it back to Amazon, there's been some the New York Times did some really interesting reporting about Amazon's retention, and their churn rate is 150% a year. Wow. So they have to replace the entire workforce basically 3 times a year, and they encourage that. And like Jeff, he doesn't call them it's not loyalty for him, it's entrenched employees, and it's not loyalty, it's entrenchment. And they turnover and churn is central to what they do, and they love to talk about how people start with full benefits and $15 an hour, but you're going to have that job for 3 to 8 months, and then that's not a career. They're going to get spit back out, and that's in warehouses, and it's also in the office. And they kind of have a mandatory 6% turnover even for office jobs. And so they just, instead of being nurtured into a career, they spit you out. And so it's crucial as we distinguish ourselves from our big tech competition that we offer a better place to work. And I think retention is one way to do that.
But they have the mindfulness booths, didn't you see? They had a tweet. That tweet was up for about 5 minutes a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it's that sensitive to PR thing. It's like, people are making fun of this, better delete it.
Right. It was what appeared to be a phone booth with some cool music and plants inside, and you'd go in there for a little while and relax and then get back out on the warehouse and do your 10 miles a day. So let me be drunk uncle again. Well, but Danny, Amazon is going to open warehouses everywhere, and they're going to take over all this empty real estate, these giant empty storefronts. And why did we kick them out of New York if they wanted to open headquarters here? What's wrong with that?
Well, it's the same thing as what kind of jobs are these? That's not sustainable development, because they're not going to pay taxes, because the only way they're going to build that warehouse is if they're not going to pay taxes on it for 30 years. The jobs are short term. They're not going to build that community. They're going to drive the vans around and pollute all the neighborhoods. It's not healthy development. It's possible to do urban renewal and urban growth in a sustainable way that nurtures community. And the Amazon model isn't it, because they're not giving anything back to the community. They're just draining. They're taking their tax breaks, and they're not paying anything back into the government, and they're providing these jobs that are not only short term but also incredibly dangerous. And it's like, that's not how I want my city to add jobs. I don't know about other folks.
That was good. Drunk Uncle's going to get another drink and
back off.
I'll concede that round. So is there a sequel to this book? I mean, at what point do you think, my job here is done for both of you? I made this movie. I hope I've changed some minds, or I wrote this book. Hopefully people understand it. Or is it just a constant epilogue? Are you constantly adding chapters to it, so to speak?
Well, I think we've said this before, the pandemic will be an inflection point of sorts. I think it'll change the way we approach this advocacy, or maybe it'll just make the voices in this space, it'll just amplify them, and people will actually hear the message. So it's hard to say what comes next. I've given up on planning throughout the pandemic, so I mean, who knows? But the goal will continue to be, on my part, to show people that you all are doing great work, and that it's an industry that's worth not just supporting in the charitable sense, but worth engaging in and being given value by. And as long as I can keep spreading that message, that's a win.
I'm for one, I'm grateful to have your finished product and something I could just point people to, like, here, watch this, or Danny's book, here, read this, or even your letter to Jeff Bezos, which you read online, is amazing. He didn't answer you, right?
No.
Okay. Yeah, that gives a good succinct summary of what we've talked about. But yeah, so do you now, this is probably I think you mentioned your last sort of promotion for this book. Do you kind of close the door on that chapter and hope you've made an impact, or do you keep going?
That's a great question. And in some ways I don't know. I signed up to this writing thing to be a poet. I never expected to write a small activist nonfiction book. I'm grateful for the chance. I love that it's found an audience and a lot of resonance. I think, and it's interesting when Joe Beal, who's the editor at Microcosm, approached me about writing a book. He wanted it to be really like fiery and feisty, and that's kind of what Microcosm is. And it's like, burn it down, let's take it to Amazon. And like, I think there is some of that in the book. But the story I've always been interested in telling is a positive one about indie bookstores and championing the importance of it and celebrating this wonderful community. So like the kind of bargain we struck before I signed my book contract is that there would be these interlude chapters that are just slices of bookstore life in between this subject by subject takedown of what Amazon does. And so it was really important to me to uplift and criticize at the same time. So I still think there's more to do in telling the story of the American indie bookstore. And so this idea is really nebulous. And like, I haven't started it yet. I'm well into another poetry collection, but I'm not sure there's been a satisfactory like cultural history of the American independent bookstore. Kind of a big hardcover nonfiction about the story of the American independent bookstore, like pre-war, Salman Rushdie, Borders, Free Speech Today, like the whole thing. And if I ever get the time, it would be an interesting project to take on. But that's where I see this next is shifting the conversation away. Like, I don't want to spend my entire career writing about Amazon because, like, I don't want Jeff Bezos to live in my head that much. He already does far too much. And so I'd be interested in investigating and celebrating this wonderful network of stores we have in the country and have had for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And I should say, well, first off, if we can get Ken Burns to do like an 8-hour piece on the indie bookstore, that would be amazing.
Oh, that's great.
One project that I have been thinking about for a while, and this is still just in the prospecting phase, I think it'd be so cool to do a docu-series like Street Food, if you've seen that on Netflix, where they spotlight street vendors around different areas of different countries. If you could do that with bookstores and booksellers, I think there would be an audience for that, and it would give a little more slice of life. This is what the indie experience is. This is their story. So I would love to be a part of a project like that.
We've been joking. I love Guy Fieri, and Guy Fieri plays a central role in my third poetry collection. But like Triple D for bookstores would be amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
Just go celebrate these places. All right. Well, Mason, you know how to get in touch with me. That sounds like a fun project.
Yeah, let's do it. I'll hit up Ken and we'll link up.
There might be 7 or 9 streaming services that could
not Prime.
Pick that up. Yeah, not Prime. So it's funny, you mentioned uplifting indies and you mentioned beating Amazon. I don't think we can beat Amazon. This is something my wife told me at some point, because once I got hold of our Twitter handle, I was excited to just basically, talk about Amazon all the time. But I think at some point you sort of exhaust that, and you need to shift the conversation and really lift yourself up. But your Twitter feed, I wanted to plug because it's fantastic. It's sort of the crown jewel, I think, of book selling. It's at Raven Bookstore. So we like to have fun around Prime Day and just sort of throw out some facts. But I think Bezos continues to shoot himself in the foot. So I think it's become easier now to point to him and say, this is what you're supporting, right? So it is. I think it is easier now to sort of have that conversation and then just sort of shift to uplifting our own voices. And you talk about the documentaries. A lot of people I had worked at Blockbuster Video years ago, and some people keep asking me if I'd watched the documentary about Blockbuster, the last Blockbuster. And somehow Blockbuster sort of absorbed all the goodwill from every independent video store that no longer exists, just because this one last store was still standing. And now there's all this nostalgia and sentimentality for Blockbuster. I'm like, wait a minute, when I worked there, they said they were going to open one every 5 miles and basically just decimate every mom and pop. But now, since they're all gone, they get the credit. And I don't want Barnes & Noble to outlast us, so that when they make that documentary, it's, oh look, Barnes & Noble, represents all the bookstores that came and went before it. So I like both ideas and just sort of keep that alive. And it's pretty amazing, really, that we're all still here and thriving in a lot of ways. So thank you all for helping tell that story and amplify that. And I can't wait to see what you both do next. Thanks for coming.
Thanks,
to
Vinny.
this
Thanks
Word
for having
Live
us.
Wednesdays from everywhere. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this has been great. Thanks so much.
All right.
Thanks,
and
Vinny.
The link to buy Danny's book is right there on the bottom, and the link for Mason's bookstore film, if you want to donate to that so we can get that out into the world. Excited to finally see that. Thanks so much, guys.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Take care now. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.